The Watergate scandal was a major political scandal that occurred in the United States in the 1970s. Following a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C., and President Richard Nixon's administration's attempted cover-up of its involvement. When the conspiracy was discovered and investigated by the U.S. Congress, the Nixon administration's resistance to its probes led to a constitutional crisis. The term Watergate has come to encompass an array of clandestine and often illegal activities undertaken by members of the Nixon administration. Those activities included such dirty tricks as bugging the offices of political opponents and people of whom Nixon or his officials were suspicious. Nixon and his close aides ordered harassment of activist groups and political figures, using the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Internal Revenue Service. The scandal led to the discovery of multiple abuses of power by the Nixon administration, articles of impeachment, and the resignation of Nixon as President of the United States in August 1974. The scandal also resulted in the indictment of 69 people, with trials or pleas resulting in 25 being found guilty and incarcerated, many of whom were Nixon's top administration officials. The FBI investigated and discovered a connection between cash found on the burglars and a slush fund used by the Committee for the Re-election of the President, the official organization of Nixon's campaign. In July 1973, evidence mounted against the president's staff, including testimony provided by former staff members in an investigation conducted by the Senate Watergate Committee. The investigation revealed that President Nixon had a tape recording system in his offices and that he had recorded many conversations. After a protracted series of bitter court battles, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the president had to release the tapes to government investigators, and he eventually complied. These audio recordings implicated the president, revealing he had attempted to cover up activities that took place after the break-in and to use federal officials to deflect the investigation. Facing near certain impeachment in the House of Representatives and equally certain conviction by the Senate, Nixon resigned the presidency on August 9, 1974. On September 8, 1974, his successor, Gerald Ford, pardoned him. The name Watergate and the suffix gate have since become synonymous with political scandals in the United States. Wiretapping of the Democratic Party's headquarters. In January 1972, Gordon Liddy, general counsel to the Committee for the Re-election of the President, presented a campaign intelligence plan to CRP's acting chairman Jeb Stuart Magruder, Attorney General John Mitchell, and presidential counsel John Dean, that involved extensive illegal activities against the Democratic Party. According to Dean, this marked the opening scene of the worst political scandal of the 20th century and the beginning of the end of the Nixon presidency. Mitchell viewed the plan as unrealistic. 2 months later, he was alleged to have approved a reduced version of the plan, to include burgling the Democratic National Committee's headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C., ostensibly to photograph campaign documents and install listening devices in telephones. Liddy was nominally in charge of the operation, but has since insisted that he was duped by Dean and at least 2 of his subordinates. These included former CIA officers E. Howard Hunt and James McCord, then CRP security coordinator. In May, McCord assigned former FBI agent Alfred C. Baldwin III to carry out the wiretapping and monitor the telephone conversations afterward. McCord testified that he selected Baldwin's name from a registry published by the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI to work for Committee to re-elect the president. Baldwin first served as bodyguard to Martha Mitchell, the wife of John Mitchell, who was living in Washington. Baldwin accompanied Martha Mitchell to Chicago. Martha did not like Baldwin and described him as the gauchest character I've ever met. The committee replaced Baldwin with another security man. On May 11, McCord arranged for Baldwin, whom investigative reporter Jim Hoogan described as somehow special and perhaps well known to McCord, to stay at the Howard Johnson's motel across the street from the Watergate complex. The room 419 was booked in the name of McCord's company, at behest of G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt. McCord and his team of burglars prepared for their first Watergate break-in, which began on May 28. Two phones inside the offices of the DNC headquarters were said to have been wiretapped. One was the phone of Robert Spencer Oliver, who at the time was working as the executive director of the Association of State Democratic Chairmen, and the other was the phone of DNC Secretary Larry O'Brien. The FBI found no evidence that O'Brien's phone was bugged. However, it was determined that an effective listening device had been installed in Oliver's phone. Despite the success in installing the listening devices, the committee agents soon determined that they needed to be repaired. They planned a second burglary in order to take care of this. Shortly after midnight on June 17, 1972, Frank Wills, a security guard at the Watergate complex, noticed tape covering the latches on some of the doors in the complex leading from the underground parking garage to several offices. He removed the tape, and thought nothing of it. He returned an hour later and, having discovered that someone had retaped the locks, Wills called the police. 5 men were discovered inside the DNC office and arrested. They were Virgilio Gonzalez, Bernard Barker, James McCord, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis, who were charged with attempted burglary and attempted interception of telephone and other communications. On September 15, a grand jury indicted them, as well as Hunt and Liddy, for conspiracy, burglary, and violation of federal wiretapping laws. The 5 burglars who broke into the office were tried by a jury, Judge John Sirica officiating, and were convicted on January 30, 1973.